Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Thought Room. I'm Daniel, and I'm really glad you're here today. Let me ask you a question that sounds simple, but feels strangely painful. Have you ever opened your banking app, looked at your balance, and thought, wait, where did all my money go? Not in a dramatic way. Not because you bought a car. Not because you booked a trip to the Maldives. Not because you decided to buy a castle in Italy for absolutely no reason. No. I'm talking about that very ordinary, very frustrating moment when your money seems to disappear, even though you can't remember spending it on anything important. You work hard. You try to be responsible. You tell yourself, this month will be different. And then somehow, your salary arrives, smiles at you for about 12 seconds, and then vanishes into thin air. If that sounds familiar, today's episode is for you. Because today we're talking about a problem that is much more common than people admit. And of course, I'm not doing this alone. Joining me again is Mia, who is brilliant, honest, and unfortunately also very experienced in the art of wondering where her money went. Hi, Mia.
Hi, Daniel. Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say that I don't appreciate being introduced as a financial mystery case. But yes, I have absolutely looked at my bank account like it personally betrayed me. You know that feeling when you check your balance and suddenly become a detective? You start investigating every transaction like it's part of a crime documentary? Okay, who is this cafe? Why did I pay them 3 times this week? Why am I paying for a subscription I forgot existed? And most importantly, who gave past me permission to be this careless? But jokes aside, I think this topic matters because so many people think they have a money problem when what they actually have is a behavior problem. That sounds harsh, but I don't mean it in a judgmental way. I mean that the real issue often isn't income alone. Sometimes the problem is hidden in our habits, in the tiny daily decisions that seem harmless in the moment, but slowly drain our money over time. And the tricky part is that those decisions rarely feel dangerous. Nobody thinks, yes, this unnecessary late-night online purchase will destroy my financial stability. It feels small. It feels deserved. It feels temporary. But when those moments happen again and again and again, they become expensive. So yes, today I'm ready to expose myself and my terrible old spending habits for educational purposes.
Thank you for your bravery. This is a safe space. Mostly. And I think you just said something really important. The danger is usually hidden in small decisions. When people imagine financial problems, they often imagine dramatic things. Huge debt, big emergencies, a massive purchase that ruined everything. But for a lot of people, money doesn't disappear because of one giant mistake. It disappears because of 100 tiny, forgettable choices. A coffee here, a delivery order there, a sale you couldn't miss, a treat-yourself purchase after a bad day, a you only live once purchase after a good day. Which is interesting because apparently every emotion can become a shopping reason if we try hard enough. Stressed? Buy something. Tired? Buy something. Bored? Buy something. Happy? Reward yourself. Sad? Comfort yourself. Mildly inconvenienced because your Wi-Fi was slow for 6 minutes? Clearly, you deserve new shoes. And this is where things get interesting psychologically. Spending money is not always about the thing we're buying. Sometimes it's about the feeling we want to create. We're not buying a shirt. We're buying the feeling of becoming a better version of ourselves. We're not ordering food just because we're hungry. Sometimes we're ordering comfort, relief, convenience, or the right to avoid cooking after a long day. We're not always paying for a product. We're often paying for an emotion. And emotions are expensive when you don't notice them running the show.
Exactly. I think one of the biggest turning points for me was realizing that my spending had very little to do with logic and a lot to do with mood. There was a time when I genuinely believed I was bad at saving. I used to say it like it was part of my personality. Oh, I'm just not the kind of person who saves money. I'm terrible with money. And the problem with saying that over and over again is that eventually you start acting like it's true. You stop trying to improve because you think the problem is your identity instead of your habits. But when I actually looked at my spending, I noticed a pattern. I spent more when I felt emotionally off balance. If I was stressed after work, I'd order food even when there was perfectly good food at home. If I was tired, I'd buy little things online because I wanted a quick reward. If I was feeling insecure, I'd convince myself that a new outfit, a new skincare product, or some random life-changing item would somehow make me feel more in control. And for a few minutes, it worked. That's the dangerous part. It actually worked. For a moment. Buying something gave me a tiny emotional high. It felt exciting. It felt like I had done something nice for myself. But the feeling faded quickly, and the money was still gone. That's why emotional spending is such a trap. It offers relief without solving the real problem. If you're exhausted, shopping doesn't solve exhaustion. If you're lonely, a package arriving at your door doesn't solve loneliness. If you're anxious about your future, buying another Productive Girl notebook, 3 pens, and a water bottle with motivational quotes on it probably won't fix that either. And yes, I'm speaking from experience.
That was painfully specific, which means it definitely came from a real memory. But you're right, emotional spending often acts like a quick fix. And a quick fix is dangerous because it gives you the illusion of control. You feel like you've done something. You feel better for a little while. But underneath that temporary comfort, the real issue is still sitting there, waiting for you. I also think social media has made this much worse. Years ago, you mostly compared your life to people around you. Classmates, coworkers, neighbors, maybe a cousin who somehow always had better hair than you. Now, you compare yourself to thousands of people every single day. You open your phone and immediately see people traveling, redecorating their homes, buying expensive skincare, eating at beautiful restaurants, wearing perfect outfits, and somehow living lives that look both luxurious and effortless. And even if you know intellectually that social media is curated, even if you know it's a highlight reel, it still gets into your head. It still whispers, maybe your life would feel better if you bought what they bought. That's one of the reasons people fall into the trap of keeping up with the Joneses. For anyone listening who hasn't heard that idiom before, it means trying to match other people's lifestyle, spending, or status. And it's exhausting. It's like running on a treadmill that someone else controls. Because there will always be someone with a nicer apartment, a better phone, a more expensive holiday, a cleaner kitchen, and somehow more emotional stability than the rest of us on a Tuesday morning. If your spending is based on trying to keep up with people online, you'll never feel like you've arrived. The finish line keeps moving.
Yes. And I think comparison changes not only how we spend, but also why we spend. Sometimes we're not buying because we truly want something. We're buying because we want to feel like we're not falling behind. That's a very different motivation. I remember a period when everyone around me seemed to be upgrading their lives at the same time. One person moved into a beautiful apartment. Another started traveling constantly. Someone else bought expensive clothes and somehow looked like they had their whole life together. And I felt this weird pressure to catch up, even though no one had actually asked me to. That's what makes comparisons so sneaky. Nobody needs to say, you should spend more. You just absorb the pressure silently. You start thinking things like, maybe I need better clothes to feel more successful. Maybe I need a more aesthetic workspace to become more productive. Maybe if I buy the same things successful people buy, I'll become one of them. And honestly, sometimes marketing is built on exactly that fantasy. It doesn't just sell a product, it sells an identity. Not buy this notebook, It says, buy this notebook and become organized, focused, calm, successful, and deeply attractive while drinking coffee by a window. Not buy this skincare product. It says, buy this and become the type of person who wakes up at 6 a.m., drinks lemon water, has clear skin, perfect boundaries, and somehow never sends embarrassing texts. And if you're feeling insecure, tired, or lost, that message can be very persuasive. Because what you really want is not the object. You want the transformation the object promises. But buying the symbol of a better life is not the same as building a better life.
That line is worth repeating. Buying the symbol of a better life is not the same as building a better life. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. They confuse spending with progress. Buying gym clothes feels like becoming healthy. Buying books feels like becoming disciplined. Buying expensive stationery feels like becoming organized. Buying a productivity app feels like getting your life together. And sometimes those things can genuinely help. I'm not saying every purchase is meaningless, but if we're honest, we all know the difference between buying the tools and actually doing the work. Owning a beautiful planner does not mean you've planned your life. Owning running shoes does not mean you've gone for a run. Owning 10 self-help books does not mean you've applied a single lesson from them. Sometimes our purchases let us feel productive without requiring any actual change. And that's dangerous because it makes us feel like we're moving forward when we're actually standing still. There's another idiom that fits here. A fool and his money are soon parted. It basically means that if someone is careless or unwise with money, they lose it quickly. Now, I'm not calling anyone a fool. We're not here to insult people who bought 17 candles because the packaging was pretty. We're here to be honest about how easy it is to separate ourselves from our money when we're not paying attention. And attention is really the key word here. Because money rarely disappears in complete darkness. It disappears in distraction. It disappears when you're too busy, too tired, too emotional, or too disconnected from your habits to notice what's happening.
Yes, and that's why awareness matters so much. I know track your expenses sounds like the most boring advice in the world. It doesn't sound deep. It doesn't sound life-changing. No one hears make a spreadsheet and thinks, wow, this is the beginning of my transformation. But honestly, it can be. Because once you actually see where your money is going, you stop guessing. And guessing is dangerous. When I wasn't tracking my spending, I always underestimated it. I'd say things like, I barely spend money on food delivery. Then I'd look at my bank statement and realize I had created a full-time financial relationship with 3 separate delivery apps. I'd say, I only buy little things. And yes, technically they were little things. But little things add up. That's the part people ignore. A $10 purchase doesn't feel serious. A $15 purchase doesn't feel serious. A random online order because it was on sale doesn't feel serious. But when those things happen every week or every few days, they become serious very quickly. There's an idiom I really like for this. Take care of the pennies and the pounds will take care of themselves. The idea is simple. Small amounts of money matter. If you ignore the small leaks, you'll keep wondering why the big number in your account never grows. And this doesn't mean you have to become obsessed with every coin or never enjoy your life. It just means you need to stop acting like small spending is invisible. Because invisible spending is exactly what makes your money vanish.
That's such an important distinction. Being aware of your money is not the same as becoming miserable about money. A lot of people hear financial advice and immediately imagine a life with no fun, no spontaneity, no joy, just a sad person whispering no to themselves in a supermarket aisle. But healthy money habits are not about punishment. They're about intention. The goal isn't to stop spending forever. The goal is to spend on purpose, to know what matters to you and direct your money there instead of letting it drift into random habits. For example, if someone truly loves traveling, then maybe it makes sense for them to spend less on daily impulse purchases so they can spend more on trips that genuinely matter to them. If someone values peace of mind, maybe saving an emergency fund matters more than buying things just because they're trendy. If someone wants to leave a stressful job one day, maybe their money needs to support that long-term freedom rather than short-term comfort. Money is not just money. It's stored choice. It's stored time. It's stored freedom. Every amount you keep, save, or spend is connected to the kind of life you're building. And I think that's where this conversation becomes emotional in a deeper way. Because when your money keeps disappearing, it's not only about numbers. Sometimes it creates guilt. Sometimes it creates shame. Sometimes it creates fear about the future. You start asking yourself uncomfortable questions. Why can't I get this under control? Why do I keep repeating the same behavior? What's wrong with me? And I want to say this clearly. If you struggle with money habits, it does not mean you're lazy, stupid, or hopeless. It usually means there's a pattern underneath your behavior that needs to be understood, not just judged.
I'm really glad you said that because shame makes everything worse. When people feel ashamed of their money habits, they often avoid looking at them altogether. They stop checking their bank account. They avoid budgeting. They ignore bills for a little too long. They tell themselves, "I'll deal with it later," because facing it feels emotionally uncomfortable. But of course, avoiding the problem doesn't make it smaller. It usually makes it bigger. I've done that too. I've had moments where I knew I was spending carelessly, but I didn't want to look too closely because I was afraid of what I'd find. And that's such a human reaction. We avoid things that make us feel guilty. But financial honesty is one of those uncomfortable things that becomes less scary the moment you face it. The first time you sit down and really look at your spending, you might feel embarrassed. You might see patterns you don't like. You might realize you've been wasting money on habits that don't even make you happy. But that moment of honesty is powerful, because now you're no longer in the dark. Now you have information. And information gives you options. You can ask useful questions like, what am I spending on that doesn't actually improve my life? What do I buy when I'm stressed? What subscriptions, habits, or routines are draining money without giving me much in return? What would happen if I redirected even part of this money towards something meaningful? That's when change starts to feel real. Not when you make a dramatic promise at midnight saying, "From tomorrow on, I will become a completely different person," because midnight confidence is dangerous. Midnight confidence will have you planning a new life, a 6-month budget, a fitness routine, a business strategy, and a trip to Japan all at once. And then the next morning you wake up and buy iced coffee as a reward for your ambition.
That is unbelievably accurate. Midnight confidence really is one of the most financially unstable versions of a person. And this brings us to something practical. If we know that emotion influences spending, then we need systems that protect us from our own temporary moods. Because relying on willpower alone is risky. Willpower is wonderful in theory, but in real life, it gets very weak when you're tired, hungry, overwhelmed, or staring at a limited-time offer that claims to end in 6 minutes. So instead of depending only on self-control, it helps to create friction between you and unnecessary spending. For example, if online shopping is a problem, remove your card details from shopping apps so buying something takes more effort. If delivery apps are draining your money, set a weekly limit in advance, instead of deciding in the moment when you're exhausted. If late-night impulse shopping is your weakness, don't browse when you're emotionally vulnerable and half asleep. If subscriptions keep stealing money quietly, choose one day each month to review them. These are not dramatic solutions. They're simple systems, but simple systems can save you from complicated consequences. Another useful habit is the 24-hour rule. If you want to buy something that isn't essential, wait 24 hours before purchasing it. If you still want it tomorrow and it genuinely fits your budget, maybe it's worth considering. But very often, the emotional urgency disappears. And that's important because a lot of unnecessary spending depends on urgency. It wants you to act before you think. Good decisions usually survive a pause. Bad impulse buys often don't.
I love that rule because it forces you to separate desire from impulse. Sometimes I'll see something and immediately think, I need this. Then I wait a day and realize, no, actually, I needed sleep. Or I needed water. Or I needed to stop scrolling at 1 a.m. like a financially irresponsible raccoon. And I think this is where people need to become more curious about themselves. Not just strict, curious. Instead of saying, I'm terrible with money, ask, what triggers me to spend? Is it stress? Is it boredom? Is it loneliness? Is it comparison? Is it the feeling that you deserve a reward because life has been difficult? Sometimes spending is connected to a deeper need that isn't being met in a healthy way. If you constantly buy things after a hard week, maybe what you really need is rest. If you spend when you feel insecure, maybe what you need is confidence, structure, or self-worth that doesn't depend on buying something new. If you spend because you're bored, maybe the real problem is that your life has become too repetitive and you're using shopping to create stimulation. When you understand the emotional job your spending is doing, you can start replacing it with something better. Maybe instead of online shopping after a stressful day, you go for a walk, call a friend, make tea, journal, or do something that actually calms your nervous system. Maybe instead of buying a reward every time you feel sad, you create non-financial rewards. Rest, music, time offline, a movie night, anything that gives comfort without draining your account. Because if every difficult emotion costs you money, your finances are always going to be at war with your feelings.
That sentence is powerful. If every difficult emotion costs you money, your finances are always going to be at war with your feelings. And that war is exhausting. So maybe the real goal is not just spend less. Maybe the goal is to become the kind of person who can pause long enough to ask, what do I actually need right now? Do I need this purchase? Or do I need comfort? Do I need entertainment? Do I need rest? Do I need a plan? Do I need to feel in control of my life again? Because once you start asking better questions, your money decisions start to change. And over time, those changes become visible. You stop feeling blindsided by your bank balance. You stop living in constant confusion. You stop wondering why nothing is left at the end of the month. Instead, you begin to notice patterns, make choices intentionally, and build trust with yourself. And I think that's one of the most underrated parts of getting better with money: self-trust. When you know you can handle your money honestly, not perfectly, but honestly, life feels calmer. You don't need to be rich to feel proud of yourself. Sometimes you just need to know that your money is no longer disappearing without your permission.
Yes, and I think that's a beautiful place to end, because this conversation isn't really about becoming rich overnight. It's about becoming aware. It's about realizing that your money story is often being written in tiny moments, in stress, in boredom, in comparison, in convenience, in habits you barely notice. And once you notice those moments, you get some power back. You don't have to become perfect. You don't have to stop enjoying life. You don't have to track every coin like you're preparing for a financial crime investigation. But you do have to be honest enough to ask, what is quietly taking my money away from me? What am I buying that doesn't actually add value to my life? What future am I funding with my current habits? Because that's the real question, isn't it? Every spending habit is a vote for a certain kind of future. And sometimes your future isn't being destroyed by one dramatic mistake. It's being delayed by dozens of small, unconscious ones. So if your money feels like it's vanishing, maybe don't start with guilt. Start with attention. Start with honesty. Start with one small change. Cancel one useless subscription. Pause one unnecessary purchase. Track 1 week of spending. Notice one emotional trigger. Because small choices may be quiet, but they are never meaningless.
Beautifully said, Mia. And thank you to everyone listening today. If this episode made you think about your own spending habits, your emotional triggers, or the quiet ways money slips through your fingers, then take that as a good sign. Awareness is uncomfortable sometimes, but it's also the beginning of change. If you enjoyed this episode of Thought Room, don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for the next conversation. And if you want, you can also share this episode with someone whose money disappears every month in a way that feels suspiciously magical. Maybe a friend, maybe a sibling, maybe yourself from 3 months ago. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your future, and keep thinking deeply. I'm Daniel, and this was Thought Room.
Bye, everyone.